I'm, I guess, agenda assistant coordinator with KIPRED think tank, and I will be moderating just the first part of introductions. Thank you very much to Dr. Luzin-Peci from KIPRED and Ismail Tasholi from Liria, Emër, a grassroots NGO on this initiative. As focus of Kosovo when it comes to transitional justice is on special court and the proceedings, I thought that your idea of expanding the discussion on how can Kosovo tackle both the painful issues of the past but also use the current toolkit to expand and see within the context of European integration what more can be done, not only through the prism of proceedings in Hague, but also through media, civil society, community work. In addition to what is happening in social media, I thought that direction is a worthy cause. So I was very happy to be able to assist and help in this process. I have some housekeeping notes I was told I should give them. We did have a number of flight problems, lost 24 hours. Some from Tel Aviv barely made it because of the situation there. Natasha barely made it because of apparently Kosovo not recognizing certain passports at the border. And some are coming tomorrow, so we have to do a little bit of exchanges of the program. So in the first part, we'll have Mr. Liria Osmani, who will be speaking on video, but will be attending tomorrow. Dan Everts, the former head of OSCE Mission Kosovo, Daniel Server on video as well, myself and Ross Schneid from Canada, our esteemed guest, who was one of the heads of NDI in Kosovo in the post-war years when we were establishing the democracy. So on this note, I would like to invite Dr. Luzin-Peci, a dear friend and one of the bright minds of Kosovo civil society, for his notes.
Can you hear me? Okay, that's fine. Yeah, Your Excellencies, distinguished former country leaders, ministers, ambassadors, scholars, journalists, practitioners, civil society representatives, survivors, colleagues, and friends. It is my great honor on behalf of the organizers to welcome you to Pristina and to this international conference, Bridges of Memory, Reconciliation and Transitional Justice in Post-Conflict Societies, Diplomacy, Memory, and Historic Interpretations. Well, like 16 years ago, for the first time in Kosovo, we as KIPRED organized a conference on transitional justice. And we had as a guest speaker there Mr. Knut Vollebæk, who used to be Commissioner, High Commissioner for National Minorities at OSCE. I was reading the paper again after 16 years, and somehow I got shocked because I saw that many things are still valid today. Against the background, allow me at the outset to thank you, for all of you, for being here. Your presence gives this conference not only intellectual weight, but also moral and political significance. We gathered personalities whose work, experience, and personal engagement belong to different fields, like diplomacy, international justice, academia, journalism, civil society, politics, and survivor advocacy. This diversity is not accidental. It reflects the central premise of this conference, that reconciliation is too important to be left to one discipline, one institution, one generation, or one official narrative. More than 2 decades after the wars that marked the violent dissolution of Yugoslavia, the Western Balkans still lives with unresolved legacies of violence, displacement, missing persons, war crimes, selective justice, contested memory, and competing historical interpretations. Our societies have changed significantly. Institutions have been built, states have been consolidated, borders have become more stable, and European integration remains the declared strategic horizon of the region. Yet, the past continues to shape identities, interethnic relations, public discourse, educational narratives, media framing, and regional diplomacy. This is why the question of memory is not merely historical, it is profoundly political. It is also deeply human. How societies remember the past determines how we recognize victims, how they treat survivors, how they educate young generations, how they protect minorities, and how they confront denial, and how they imagine coexistence. When memory is manipulated, peace becomes fragile. When victims are instrumentalized or ignored, justice becomes incomplete. When historical interpretation is captured by nationalism, democratic societies become vulnerable to polarization, disinformation, and renewed hostility. The title of this conference, Bridges of Memory, was chosen deliberately. Memory can divide, but it can also connect. It can be used to deepen grievances, but it can also become a foundation for recognition, responsibility, and dialogue. The challenge before us is not to impose a single memory, nor to erase the complexity of history. The challenge is to create a shared commitment to facts, dignity, accountability, and responsible public discourse. Kosovo is particularly important place to hold this debate. Our post-war experience includes international intervention, international administration, state building, contested recognition, and continuing search for justice, and unresolved relations with Serbia. Kosovo is not only a case of study of post-conflict transformation, it is also a living society in which the questions of truth, justice, memory, and reconciliation remain urgent and politically consequential. During these 2 days, we will examine 4 interconnected dimensions. First, the politics of memory and the way historical interpretation shapes identity, legitimacy, and interethnic relations. Second, the legacy of international justice mechanisms and the evolution of norms such as the responsibility to protect. Third, the role of media in constructing, challenging, or distorting public memory. And fourth, the broader field of transitional justice, including judicial and non-judicial mechanism, documentation, truth-seeking, survivor testimony, and community-level reconciliation. We are especially honored that this conference brings together former leaders and diplomats, international justice practitioners, distinguished journalists, scholars, civil society actors, and survivors advocates. Their perspective will help us move beyond the slogans and confront the difficult questions. Why has accountability often failed to produce recognition? Why do judicial truths not always become social truths? How can media resist revisionism instead of producing it? How can diplomacy support reconciliation without sacrificing justice? And how can our societies build a future that is not imprisoned by the past, but also not built on denial? Let me conclude with one thought. In post-conflict societies, the past is never only behind us. It is present in institutions, in families, in cemeteries, in classrooms, in media narratives, in diplomatic negotiations, and in the silence of those who were never heard. Our responsibility is not to close the past artificially, but to deal with it honestly. Only then can memory become a bridge rather than a battlefield. I wish all of us a thoughtful, courageous, and constructive conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Petsi. Ismail Tasholi from Liria, Emër, grassroots NGO. A few words of welcome.
So I will speak in Albanian, and let's check translators how good they are. We are ready, I think. Të nderuar ish-ministra, ambasador, përfaqësues të institucioneve ndërkombëtare, akademik, studius, gazetar, përfaqësues të shoqërisë civile, mbijetues dhe musafir të nderuar. Mirë se vini në Prishtinë, në një vend që e njeh peshën e kujtesës, sfidat e skalumes dhe rëndësinë e dialogut për të ardhmen. Prania juaj në këtë konferencë jep asaj jo vetëm rëndësi profesionale, po edhe morale. Tuar prej përvojave të vendeve dhe Okay. We can. Why? It's not working. It's okay? Okay. Të ardhur prej përvojave, vendeve dhe institucioneve të ndryshme, ju silli këndvështrime të çmueshme mbi lirinë, drejtësinë tranzicionale, ndërtimin e paqes së qëndrueshme dhe pajtimin. Është nder që sot ju kemi mes nesh për me i nda përvojat, reflektimet dhe vizionet tuaja në një kohë kur nevoja për dialog, mirëkuptim dhe bashkëpunim mbetet paqe e rëndësishme sa edhe vetë kujtesa e skalumes. Si duket, po jetojmë në një kohë ku disa prej parimeve themelore që kanë shpjegu dhe përtheku botën për shekujt e tanë, po ndryshojnë. Nëse dikur Machiavelli mësonte politikës se mënyra më efektive për me mirëmbajt pushtetin ishte për çaj dhe sunda, sot, sidomos me paradigmen e teknologjisë, duket se po përballemi me një formulë tjetër, futo dhe sunda. Nëse dikur Francis Bacon ne shënjonte modernitetin, kur thoshte se dia është pushtet, sot gjithnjë më shumë po shohëm se vëmendja është pushtet. Në kohën e Machiavellit, sundimtari duhej me nda njerëzit në grupe kundërshtare. Konflikti mes tyne e bante ma të lehtë kontrollin e tyne. Sot nuk është më e domosdoshme që njerëzit me qenë veç të përqanë. Mjafton me qenë të hutum që pushteti me i mirëmbajt agjendat private. Mjafton mos me qenë të sigurt se çka janë faktet, të vërtetat e çka është e rreme. Mjafton me u përmbyt prej një lumit pa fund informacioni ku faktet, opinionet, propaganda dhe spektakli përzihen në një rrjedhë të vetme. Në këtë realitet të ri, qytetari nuk kontrollohet të ja ndalu informacionin, por të ja shtu. Të ja dhënë atë shumë sa me hum aftësinë për me dallu atë që ka rëndësi. Atë që pak a shumë e paralajmëronte Heideggeri, kalimi i shoqënive prej interesit te interesantja. Nuk jetojmë më në epokën e cenzurës klasike, jetojmë në epokën e mbingarkesës, overdozës informative. Rreziku nuk është më mungesa e informacionit, por teprica e tij. Kjo lidhe drejt për drejt edhe me ndryshimin e dytë të madh. Bacon besonte se dia prodhonte pushtet dhe kishte të drejtë për kohën e tij. Por sot informacioni gjendet kudo. Në telefonin që e mbajmë në xhep, kemi ma shumë informacion se sa kishin bibliotekat ma të mëdha të botës para disa shekujsh. Megjithatë, nuk duket se jemi bashkë shumë më të mençur. Prandaj, pushteti nuk qëndron më veç te zëtrimi i dijes, pushteti qëndron te aftësia për me kap dhe kontrollu vëmendjen. Kush e kontrollon vëmendjen tonë, e kontrollon mënyrën se si mendojmë, çka ndjejmë, për çka zemrohemi dhe për çka heshtim. E kontrollon qëndësimin tonë. Në epokën ku të vërtetat janë bërë të mërzitshme, kemi shumë nevojë për larëshi perspektivash që me ju ik dogmave, atyne tereneve ku përfundon tjetri. Kemi nevojë për dialog, apo si që përdorëm na këtu një ideom me ndru në laf, po mrena disa parimeve që ende ju besojmë se shënojnë humanën. Faleminderit.
Thank you. The first panel starts now. We have Professor Server online on Zoom. He's going to join us on the big screen. Dennis, Ross, Liria, you're moderating, I think. Myself. That's it?
Yes, please, the first members of the first participants of the first panel, please join us.
I will try within 6 sentences to give a talk about the first panel.
Allow me to begin with a simple observation. 25 years after the wars of the former Yugoslavia, the Western Balkans is no longer at war. But it is not entirely at peace with its past. The wars have ended, the arguments did not. They continue in textbooks, in political speeches, in commemorations, in media narratives, in diplomatic disputes, and increasingly on social media platforms. So for many years there was an assumption that time would gradually
Resolve these tensions. That economic development, cooperation, democratic consolidation, and European integration would make historical disputes less politically relevant. But the Western Balkans suggest otherwise. The past has not disappeared, çdo
it has adapted,
ajo është
and it is supported by
madje në
revisionist
disa raste
governments
ajo
in
ka
our region.
mbështetur dhe pushtetet për qeverinë
Today's panel brings,
paneli i
can I say, old
sjell,
timers
pa mund të them,
from today's perspective,
njerëz që
people who have dealt or who have confronted this challenge from different perspectives,
ndërshtrimet të
either
ndryshme,
diplomacy,
qoftë diplomacia,
including justice and human rights,
drejtët e
journalism,
njeriut,
and
gazetëria dhe studime
historical
historike.
So I hope our discussion can shed light on the question how do societies build a common future when they continue to fundamentally disagree about the past. And let us begin. Dan Server from Washington. Good to see you. Welcome. The floor is yours. And we have put some guiding questions to the panel. I'm not saying that anybody should strictly adhere to them. But then, can diplomacy succeed when societies remain divided over the past? And I'm asking this question especially in the current context where Kosovo is.
Let me start at my own beginning in the Balkans, and this will be as well an answer to your question about the role of diplomats. The prevailing view at the State Department in the 1990s was that truth would set everybody free, as the Gospel of John teaches. And that truth required a neutral setting where it could be determined according to judicial rules of evidence. So most of us at that time supposed, the question of memory was not the top priority, of course, but most of us supposed that the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, affectionately known as ICTY, would reveal essential data and enable everyone to come to evidence-based conclusions on the history of the 1990s conflicts. On the basis of a common database, reconciliation can follow. Obviously, that doesn't happen. I don't really fault the tribunal. I think it did its job reasonably well once it got going, and the indictees were all delivered to The Hague. I want to point out that was a really good thing, as the presence of the indictees in their homelands would have made the post-war peace processes much more difficult. But politics in the Balkans was more potent than evidence in The Hague. I'm going to surprise you a little by blaming not diplomats, but democracy and negotiating peace agreements for that gap between politics and evidence. The agreements left the warring parties in place. That's an essential characteristic of negotiating peace agreements. It's a feature, it's not a glitch. Democracy, or at least a semblance of elections, is too often unfree, in too often unfree and unfair environments, is given the previously warring parties the power to reject and restore what was said in The Hague to their own political advantage. 30 years later, the ideologies and even some of the people who invented them are still in place. The Serb student's Kragujevac's memorandum is the most recent example of persistent, pernicious memory. I fear the specialist chambers, which Petrick referred to as now treating the Kosovo Liberation Army as a criminal conspiracy, will create an equal and opposite reaction among Albanians. The celebrated returns of indictees, even after their convictions, to their home countries tells you what you need to know. Memory has become not a bridge, but a dead end. Transitional justice is not led to transition or reconciliation, but rather to echoes of past conflicts. Those echoes are less deadly than the original conflicts, but they may well lay the basis for future violence. It's reasonable to imagine that a magic potion known as reconciliation could ensure that does not happen. Here, let me pause for a moment because I confess to I'm getting a big echo from you. I'm getting nothing but echo. Should I continue or not?
Yes.
I should continue, okay. Here, let me pause to talk about reconciliation a little. There are things that happen in the world that I can't ask people to be reconciled to. Some of them happen in Kosova Press-it. I can't ask people who suffered murder of loved ones, rape, unjust imprisonment, and property destruction by security forces that should have been providing protection to reconcile with the perpetrators. The best I think people can do after wars like those in the Balkans is not to reconcile the unreconcilable, but rather to begin building bridges to a better future, not so much the past. This needs to be done not only at the elite level, but also among ordinary citizens. That's perhaps the biggest gap in the Balkans, a gap the diplomats should not have allowed to develop. Political leaderships would behave differently if their electors built the future across ethnic differences. That's particularly difficult in Kosovo, because of the language difference and physical separation. So I'm going to offer you a specific proposition. It's for the future, it's not for the past. I believe that if Kosovo were to offer English language education from kindergarten to 12th grade, many citizens, both Serbs and Albanians, would enroll their children in integrated schools, hoping that good English would open the path to better employment. Making the future prosperity of your children a common enterprise would help overcome ethnic differences. Sure, there'd be some big problems, both in the classroom and on the playground, but the children would learn each other's language as well as English. Common enterprises like this can be done, but it will require acknowledging the unreconcilable. It needs to be acknowledged, not necessarily reconciled, and deciding to move past the unreconcilable. So let me conclude. People are entitled to their own memories, but if conflict is to be avoided, they need to share the future.
Thank you. Thank you. This is inspiring. Thank you very much for this insightful wrap-up of your immense experience on the ball. And I shouldn't be saying the word anymore. Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much. We will move. Former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of North Macedonia was unfortunately prevented from coming to Pristina today, but he was kind enough and understandable enough to send us a short video presentation. So before I go to our distinguished speakers, I suggest that we move on with Mr. Osmani's video address, where I think in particular he tries to answer the first question, can diplomacy succeed when societies remain divided?
Video partners Osman.
North Macedonia and former Chairman Office of the OSCE, I have spent many years dealing with questions of conflict, peace and reconciliation. One lesson has remained constant throughout that experience. Peace agreements can stop violence, but they cannot by themselves create reconciliation. For that, societies need trust, they need accountability, and they need confidence that justice is being pursued fairly and honestly. This is why transitional justice matters. At its core, transitional justice is not only about courts, prosecutors and verdicts. It is about how societies confront painful chapters of their past while building a peaceful future. It is about recognizing victims, establishing accountability, preserving the truth, and creating the conditions for lasting peace. The Balkans understand this challenge better than most regions. Our history reminds us that conflict rarely begins suddenly. Before violence appears, trust usually disappears. Political disagreements deepen. Institutions lose credibility. Communities become divided. And only then does a political crisis become a security crisis. That is why the work of reconciliation does not begin when a conflict ends. In many ways, that is when it truly begins. And it is in this context that Kosovo's experience deserves particular attention. When Kosovo accepted the establishment of the specialist chambers, it did something unusual in the history of transitional justice. This was not a mechanism imposed after military defeat. It was not the result of a negotiated surrender. Kosovo accepted it voluntarily. Its institutions chose to place their trust in international justice because they believed the accountability strengthens legitimacy rather than weakens it. That was an extraordinary act of confidence. Few post-conflict societies have demonstrated such willingness to place themselves voluntarily under international scrutiny. Naturally, such confidence also created expectations. The expectation that justice would be fair, that facts would matter, that context would matter, and that every conclusion would be reached through a careful examination of the full reality in which events took place. These expectations are not political, they are inherent to the very idea of transitional justice. Because the purpose of transitional justice is not only accountability, it is also the preservation of truth. Accountability and truth should reinforce one another. One should never come at the expense of the other. Any discussion about reconciliation in Kosovo must begin with a simple reality. There can be no sustainable reconciliation without recognition of the suffering endured by the victims of the Milosevic regime. There can be no sustainable reconciliation without accountability for the crimes that were committed then. And there can be no sustainable reconciliation without respect for the historical circumstances that ultimately led to international intervention. Acknowledging these realities does not obstruct reconciliation. It makes reconciliation possible. Today, however, we face another challenge. Not only denial, but increasingly relativization. The tendency to treat established facts as merely one interpretation among many. The temptation to reshape history according to political needs. This is dangerous, because confidence in justice depends on confidence in facts. People do not expect courts to confirm political narratives, nor should they, but they do expect every relevant fact to be heard, every relevant circumstance to be considered, and every conclusion to be reached independently, fairly, and comprehensively. That expectation is not a challenge to justice. It is an expression of faith in justice. And it is precisely because justice matters that facts matter. Context matters. Historical truth matters. And allow me to conclude with one final thought. The question facing our region is not whether history will continue to influence us. It will. The real question is whether we will have the confidence to confront the past honestly while building the future together. Whether we will preserve truth while pursuing justice. And whether we will ensure that the search for accountability strengthens reconciliation rather than weakens it. The past cannot be changed, but the lessons we draw from it will shape the future. Thank you very much.
I apologize for the technical issues which we are having. Next speaker is Mr. Dan Everts, the first head of OSCE mission in Kosovo, I believe. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder what I should be telling you. But having listened to the two previous speakers, it may be a good idea, being a man of the past, obviously, that I bring you back 25 years, a quarter century, to the time when Kosovo was being newly built, rebuilt, on the ruins of what was left by Milosevic. Few people realize, I think, that, or recognize, that reconstruction and rehabilitation process 25 years ago was an international intervention that compares very well to any other international intervention that was meant to make or keep peace. I have been part of or witnessing interventions in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Rwanda, in Afghanistan, and for that matter in Bosnia, which all led to pretty disastrous results. Not so here in Kosovo. I think it stands as an example where the efforts of a motivated local population and a well-intended international community produced interesting results. And there were a few issues that came to a solution that are quite relevant for the current days of gloom and doom, when we are all desperate about how to achieve reconciliation. There are some good lessons from that early days in Kosovo, and a few of you in the audience know probably what I refer to, but let me repeat. There were three big issues we had to tackle in those early days together. One was public security, one was informing the public and making them informed participants in the development process, and the third one was representative government. I can dwell on each of them very, very long. I won't do that. And they will come back, I'm sure, in other discussions. But let me just briefly mention them. Also in connection with the reconciliation challenges. On the public security, it was obvious in the early days that without security, there is no development for nobody, for no community. So something had to happen. Internationals cannot provide really security for the common people in the street. It has to be domestic. So from the very start, the OSCE made a huge effort to help train a local domestic Kosovar police. Within a month, we had a police school in Fusha, and the Americans were very helpful there, I must say. But it was a great priority that paid off. We were able to insist that it was a multi-ethnic force. We had Serbs, we had Bosniaks in the police force in the initial days, and they were quite welcomed. We also made sure that there was a 20%, at least we aimed for 20% women participation in the police. Not everyone agreed with that at the time. There were some very respectable Kosovar leaders who said, this is not part of our culture. But we happened to insist, and it worked out well. So on the police force, we did, I think, together a great job. In fact, so good that we exported it to Georgia. Many people don't know, but Georgia in the Orange Revolution, Saakashvili, he asked, what should I do? I happened to be there as well. He said, look at Kosovo, look at the police force, multi-ethnic, women there. They give a sense of security to people, provided you pay them well, you train them well, and they're not corrupt. And they did. Saakashvili's initial success in Georgia was very much due to this police effort. On the second issue, public information, let me be also very quick here. We felt that the public, in order to bring them in to the reconstruction, the rehabilitation, they have to be properly informed. So we made, and Liria, you were there, and you know what we did. We started with this Kosovo television, not a state television. I made it absolutely clear in those early days. We want a Kosovo BBC, we call it, an independent public broadcaster that is not a mouthpiece of the government and not also an instrument of private commercial interest. We had a lot of opposition to create this. The Americans were against, ideological reasons. The old RTS staff from the former TV, state TV were against. Some commercial new broadcasters were against, but we held on thanks to funding from Japanese and Norwegians and Dutch. And it became, within a very brief time, a very well-respected public broadcaster. And it was considered by objective observers as the most reliable source of information for the population. We made also sure, of course, that there was Serbian staff on the staff of the KTS, and we provided some emission time for them. So the public information was an important. I don't know what happened since then. We made sure that the political parties would not get hold of it. So we made an independent board to guide this public broadcaster, and I personally made all efforts to get Adam Demaci heading this, because he was not party to any faction or group in Kosovo. He was a real person for the job. So that was the public information, where I think lessons can be learned. Good information is crucial for people to understand what is at stake and what are the options and the possibilities. The last one I want to quickly mention is the representative government. You cannot have an open, fair, just, democratic society without popular participation. So we went all out for the elections. They were successful, branded by others as some of the most successful post-conflict elections ever held. But what is significant for us today
rëndësishme që është më sot rëndësishme është kemi bërë pikën e suksesit që kemi përfshirë të gjitha komunitetet të marrë pjesë. Do gjithandaj, unë personalisht jo vetëm në Mitrovica, por edhe në Beograd, për të i përfshirë edhe zemrën e Kosovës. Dhe kishim ne duhet të përfshinim pak karrotat, sepse shërbimet nuk ka funksiononin për karrotat na
guaranteed representation in Parliament, the guaranteed seats, and it must be credited to the politicians, the Albanian politicians at the time, that they agreed with this. There was over-representation of the ethnic minorities in the Parliament. Unheard of in the world. It was an absolute fantastic achievement. So something to be proud of. Now, we are here to also discuss reconciliation. On the political issue, thanks to these concessions done by the Albanian side, we got the Serbs on board. I don't know where it went astray. Why that early cooperative spirit, which was achieved, has not been persisted, why it has not been kept alive as much as it should have been. So here is maybe the only thing that I would grant as a difficulty that even in our days of hopefulness, we have not been able to solve forever, and that is this ethnic divide. You ask me personally, and I will conclude. I hold, and I said that at the time, I hold one factor responsible for the ethnic antagonism, rivalry, hatred situation. And that is that when Kosovo, the new Kosovo was born, the final status was never agreed on. There was always ambiguity. And having ambiguity about the future, about the future states and laws, that encourages extreme positions on both sides. On the Albanian Kosovo side, we want immediate independence. On the Serb side, we don't want any kind of all we want power. Those were unreconcilable extremes. And we missed somehow the good middle ground because of the ambiguity. I, at the time, argued for the so-called Hong Kong scenario. In Hong Kong, as you know, the British said, we have wait 20 years from now, 10 years from now, and there will be no more a colony, we will have status, and it was agreed all around. If that had been achieved in the Kosovo case, we would have had the security that there would be a common future, and not this custom, this possibility of drifting one way or the other. This has basically led to continuous infighting and antagonism. So here, this is just some memories, because the conference is called Memories and Bridges, so I give you some memories. I show you also that there were some bridges in the past that were properly crossed and seemed to be quite hopeful. In fact, when I left Kosovo, that is 2001, 2002, I left with the feeling, mission, we basically have created a society that is flawed, no doubt, but basically democratic, fair, and open towards the future. What has happened after will be up to further debate.
Thank you very much. Two things stayed with me. One is the spirit of cooperation. for the culture of cooperation, which I think is being challenged globally today, not only here, where it's seen as weakness rather than as a value. And second is your story, how where it led, where our final step, it concluded with our independence. And there isn't anybody better to talk about that time than Mr. Dennis McShane, former Minister for Europe of back then Her Majesty's government. Mr. McShane, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Absolutely riveting. Now, I have to say, as an old Hong Kong hand, the idea that Hong Kong is the solution is fine as long as you obey Beijing, give up press freedom, give up human rights, give up rule of law, give up democracy. I mean, there are a few people in the Kremlin who say that's just what Kosovo needs. We haven't mentioned Russia at all, have we? Or Serbia. I mean, this is real life politics we're talking about. Now, my country, Great Britain, United Kingdom of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland is a moment on fire in Northern Ireland. I'm sure you've been seeing it on your television. Why? Because the noxious evil of racist nationalism incarnated by Nigel Farage and other people has hit the still smouldering cinders of minority in the island of Ireland, a majority in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, who still believe in ethno-Protestant supremacy. And that can't be eradicated that easily. And it's, the British government doesn't know what to do. You're watching the BBC all day, it's horrible. Whole streets on fire. Not Kyiv, not some massive racist riot in Trump's America, but here in our beloved Europe. And we have to actually, I think, live with some of those realities. When we talk about European integration, well, I come from a country that just voted for Brexit 10 years ago. We don't really that sort of pie-in-the-sky nonsense. We don't like Europe. We want out of Europe. And so just trying to sort of remind people of hard economic and political realities. Emër, the older people amongst us will remember him, was the very famous Israeli Prime Minister and Foreign Minister and a Cambridge graduate and an ambassador to the UN, one of the most cultivated, civilized, post-war foreign affairs statesman. And he said he very much enjoyed doing his doctorate at the London School of Economics, because as he said, it was at the LSE I learnt about the value of truth, of justice, of dialogue, and of reconciliation, which have been such a great disadvantage throughout my political career. So, we ought to, I was first with the Parliament in 1974, God, I don't know how long ago that is, and it took England 500 years to make parliamentary democracy work. A civil war, decapitating a king, giant colonies from which we extracted wealth and were forced at the end of the Ghana was bailed on a racial basis. And then when we were very rich and comfortable and calm, we were able to settle down and work hard in our own internal democracy. As the same goes in Parliament, when the MP stands up and says, and I say to the enemy over there, no, that's the opposition. The enemy is around behind you. And one of the most fascinating things, it's not anything else you can do there. You can't invent politics. You can't make people agree. And also there's quite enough investment in making Kosovo politics come to life. Kosovo certainly holds lots of elections, but it doesn't seem to have a government. Or a sense of governmental responsibility. I remain disappointed. I wrote this little book called Kosovo, Why Kosovo Still Matters in 2011. But I think it is to the huge failure of Europe in my adult political lifetime. It has not brought peace strategy to this tiny corner of our backyard. It's not wicked America, it's not evil Russia, it's not some Asiatic despotism. This is our Europe where we speak many languages, we grow up in the sight, people going back 300 years to every country in Europe, and we still have this corner of our continent where there is not a settlement and peace. So I'm glad this conference has been held, because I thought for some time there was a complacency in the first years after the ghastly loss of years ended, that everything would be going well. It's not going well. It's setting a bad example to other places in the world. I'm tempted to say, look, Hitler was finished in 1945. By 1975, when I was just leaving Oxford, we weren't talking about it. We weren't talking, demanding that every German who committed a crime during the war be put on trial. The big guys were handed all the blood, some others put in prison and released quietly. At some stage, reconciliation is about forgetting the past. Yes, if you like, burying the past. And it's very, very frustrating. And it keeps coming back. I mean, the French school I know in my local life would take me back to Oliver Cromwell and what he did to the Catholics in Ireland. My partner is Greek and go down in Athens to join. She was a former chief economist in the UK government. She also learned all her politics in the LSE after leaving high school in Greece. Probably why we so disagreed, so there we are. I went to Oxford and that's a big difference. So in Greece, I go in and say, for example, to her sister, I'm going to Macedonia. You mean Skopje. Not allowed to say the word Macedonia in the Greek passport. It is absolutely, well, that in itself, which is part of citizens, a locally elected, decent liberal politician. But still this obsession. I used to go to and watch when I was studying German in the 1970s. The Bundesvertrieben, Schließen bleibt unser. Giant rallies in Bavaria, which every conservative Christian Democratic chancellor had to go to. Schließen bleibt unser. Silesia is ours. Saying that they were driven off their ancestral land by the communists, the Russians, the West, whatever, and one day they would get Silesia back. And no German chancellor had the courage to say, you're wrong, together. Those British prime ministers would be able to say, really, I'm sorry, we'll never return to single ethnic Protestant nationalist rule in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. And it's very, very hard indeed to make all of this work. How can it work? Well, I would say economic growth solves so many problems. I'm not enough of an expert on the Kosovo economy to, I got visiting here as often as once I did, know if that's coming to fruition. I would grab, I mean, I gather my friend Eddie Ramos having problems with Gerard Kushner's little hotel development in Albania. Phone up Eddie and Gerard and say, well, forget Albania, bring it to Kosovo. Just develop. Make money. And that resolves, believe me, so many difficulties. The other thing too, I think, is I was always nervous in the time when I was here regularly at the obsession of the focus of so many Kosovo press, right across the political spectrum, that everything has to be done through Washington. That Washington is the big, great daddy or uncle in the West that will solve our problems. And only more pro-American than me. But Kosovo is part of Europe. And I used to urge, don't you remember these discussions? I said, what are you doing to talk to Spain? I go to Spain and have a flaming row with Spanish socialist friends who regard Kosovo as just a breakaway province because it's just like Catalonia. Or you go to Cyprus. Greece. They're all criminals. They're worse than that. They're a bit like the Turks. They take over a tiny bit of our land and call it their own. Now, I can have that. Constant international European level dialogue. I just don't know if Kosovo politicians are doing enough of that. I don't sense that there's enough presence of Kosovo representatives in all the senses, great singers and wonderful footballers, but not people telling the Spanish and Greeks as I do, this is crazy, it's not like Catalonia at all, it's not like Cyprus. It's not Slovakia. Why Slovakia? Why is Kosovo able to participate in European Parliament? These are small issues that need to be developed. I really loved whose idea was it? That was you, somebody else, who said, teach some high school in English. I mean, in Athens, my partner went to the Germans. And in 1905, there were 5 members of the British cabinet who had studied at German universities. It's not the First World War, but it was a step in the right direction. So, yes, I think this idea of making Kosovo the first fully Kosovën, is here, Ambassador to the Netherlands, the Dutch speak English better than the English. Just about. He's tipped, we had breakfast together this morning, and he's tipped, by the way, for the World Cup. Can I reveal it? It's Norway. So everybody got some money. He says the Dutch vote is put it on Norway. So, but I think that's the idea. I read a couple of books in Britain recently by one very distinguished foreign affairs journalist, another by a conservative politician. I like personally who was opposition. And both of them say Britain should learn from Europe. Don't do what the EU wants, but just examples of how to do education better, how to do public transport better, how to do roads better, how to build houses more efficiently. And that might be a challenge I throw out to everybody in Kosovo. That further tourism commissions copying best practice is appropriate to Kosovo's level of development. Turn the idea of what Kosovo is, but not something that's historical, not something that was a terrible conflict, not something that required massive military to make sure that there were statues of Tony Blair here and there, because he saved Kosovo, but of how Kosovo, like other countries that were incredibly poor, certainly when I was in Estonia, Finland, maybe Norway, Trent is the expert in Norway, states of developing their own potential and just putting the past behind them and not demanding, as it were, justice, which is often synonymous with revenge. Look at what they've done to Hashim Tashi. And there, I still find it absolutely appalling that the so-called Hague Court, backed by an American lawyer, Jack Smith, who tried to send Donald Trump to prison, I was all for that, but kept Hashim behind bars now for 6-7 years, on the basis of a total lie written by a Swiss politician, Dick Marty, about organ extractions during the actual military conflict. Certainly different accounts in Europe, Western series are a great expert on this. But we have to let Hashim Tashi themselves come out of this. Any Kosovo politicians to be in prison for what they did 30 years ago. We did, however, in one or two of the rule of Hess. In prison for the Russians was there, only the Russians, for the sake of vengeance, but actually nobody, frankly, what they did in a military context, we're talking about other crimes, shouldn't any longer in any kind of unlocking. So, that's it, learn from other countries, learn to speak English. My friend the French ambassador is here. Oui, on peut aussi parler français, mais bon, les gens vont arriver à comprendre si tu parles une langue
utilisé l'anglais, pas la pureté de la langue de Molière. And go above all, every form of economic development is free. And that will mean that I never have to write another book in 25 years like
Thank you very much. What I picked up on my way, the way of my mind, some of the messages that you gave was prejudice and so with these three messages, I would like to give the floor to our
Thank you very much, thank you, Dennis, and Daniel, who's following us on Zoom. I think I've been, and many of us have been to many conferences of transitional justice, because some of these things come in and out of fashion. There was a period in Kosovo when anti-corruption was seen as a quintessential component of building a just society, good governance, and there were a lot of anti-corruption conferences. And there was certainly a period of time when transitional justice and war crimes were at the forefront, not because of lack of merit, but because the focus of the political landscape and the national landscape was on the themes which touched issues of victims, perpetrators, and how to move forward. But it's impossible to discuss today in Anno Domini 2026 about this theme in Kosovo without just briefly first touching or discussing the elephant in the room. And to discuss the elephant in the room, I will quote some data which I just got yesterday from Mr. Bekim Blakaj, who heads the Fund for Humanitarian Law in Kosovo, which is probably one of the biggest and most important, most credible human rights organizations in all of former Yugoslavia, founded by Madam Nataša Kandić decades ago. So from the war in Kosovo, from the 77 fully completed sentences, so trials which got complete appeals procedure and folks have been sentenced. 41 members of Kosovo Liberation, the Serbian military police forces, and leadership were sentenced. From these 36 Serbian forces, officers or leaders, 14 were punished by the courts in Kosovo, 1 by a court in Montenegro, 15 by courts in Serbia, and 6 by the International Tribunal in Hague, while it existed. From 41 members of KLA, 35 were sentenced from Kosovo courts, 2 from Serbian courts, 2 from the Tribunal in Hague, 2 by the special chambers which are now operational, which leaves us a total disbalance in numbers, which projects something that is now that elephant in the room of Kosovar interpretation of transitional justice means. We don't believe in these things. I've seen poll numbers. What has happened in recent years, what changed because we saw the numbers of people sentenced. And regular people, regular six-pack Joe out there on the street, doesn't believe anymore that instruments which have been imposed because of Parliament by Western allies are actually tools of transitional justice. They believe they were political tools imposed for political agenda. And this brings us to a conundrum, because Kosovo is striving to become a member of EU. It may never become a member of EU, but the process of becoming a member of EU is a worthy cause, according to the political institution, to chase in order for us to have better governance, better standards, better responsive governance to the citizens, better democracy. But that road requires that we are deeply, honestly, truly engaged in the process of justice. So reconciling that deep mistrust which is currently in the Kosovo public due to these cold numbers, in which for far too long perpetrators have been equalized with victims. And these are the numbers that show that. With the fact that Kosovo has to move forward and build the type of society in which reconciliation rests on a sound, healthy soil of forgiveness, but also punishing injustice for the past. And it's a difficult process to navigate. It's difficult to navigate for politicians. Between the demands of the international community, which may or may have not been fair at the time, but certainly now seem deeply unfair after we have seen the trial, after we have seen the evidence from the deputy head of UNMIC, from the four-star generals, from US diplomats, British diplomats. But on the other hand, we have to somehow conclude this chapter. And I do hope that this conference, since this first time was framing the debate, will bring us to some momentums or moments in which we can define what are the areas in which next Kosovo government, whenever we have that government, this year, next year, it's an open question in Kosovo, can use some of the existing toolkits out there, either through community work in reconciliation, media engagement, social media interactions, which have now become fundamentally important for any kind of building of narratives, in order to move on to the next chapter of Kosovo's development, political development, economic development. But somehow, I think we cannot do that without closing and addressing that elephant in the room. That court, which several people referred to, from Professor Server to Deputy Prime Minister Osmani, to Dennis and Dan. We do hope that will be coming an opportunity for us to move forward rather than letting us get stuck in the muck of interpretation of history. I'll keep it short because maybe we'll have some Q&A and next time we'll be time. Thanks.
Sobering and right to the spot. And the last speaker is a distinct honor to introduce Ross Reed, former member of Parliament of Canada, former Minister of Atlantic Opportunities Canada, and former head of NDI. Ross, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be back. I first arrived here on the 2nd of July, 1999. In some ways, I don't feel regret. So much has changed and so much hasn't changed. I cannot speak in nearly as eloquently as others have about what's clearly the elephant in the room. It's important, particularly in the context of the topic of this discussion and to recognize that there are so many other issues around reconciliation and justice that are going to be critical to go along with the resolution of this issue, which quite clearly is the elephant in the room. I bring the perspective of the people that have been affected by this. I've lived and worked in a number of post-conflict states. And as I look at the conflict and the resolution of the conflict, I'm repeatedly reminded that the people most affected by the conflict are generally ignored. Normally, the men, the women, the families, their families, the land is lost. That we have political and diplomatic agreements and conventions to frankly deal with things up here konvente që trajtojnë këto çështje të lartë, ama nuk rezonojnë me njerëzit të cilët kam kaluar shumë kohë në dhe të folën në Sri Lanka.
In the last 17 years, so many issues completely unresolved that are affecting every single part of lives in Northern Asia. So when we ask questions about can democracy succeed in societies remain divided, or can diplomacy succeed in societies remain divided, I wonder if diplomacy can succeed when the countries that they represent are so divided, and view of the past and the future is so different. If it's going to be successful at that level, there needs to be some consistency in terms of the past meant and the future brings. Past is not only behind us, as we said earlier, and we need to keep remembering. Reconciliation cannot happen unless in the longer term, in my view, and I think transitional justice where it has worked is proven, that the international community must remain to some extent involved after the fact. There's too many examples where we simply was an agreement, great, it's wonderful, look what we've done, and then they walk away. Dan is absolutely right. In my experience of being here in those early days, the work that OSCE did was unparalleled. When they closed down, the reconstruction became quite quickly because of the work that was so successful. The elections, I thought having municipal elections first was a crazy idea.
Zgjedhjet komunale ka qenë një çmenduri, por mendoj se ka na doli që
Truth
është ide
as somebody at the risk of being offended, acknowledgement of what is truth and acceptance broadly of what truth means. Because too many people have their own view of what truth means. And that's human nature can always be the same. But there needs to be some sort of consensus. Reparations are part of it. Reparations are a part of transitional justice, even though these many years later. Institutional reforms are critical, and Kosova has good experience in terms of developing institutions, whether it's parliament or parties or elections or rule of law, things like that. But I would hope that what they are able to do, that's not happening as much across the world, that those institutions can in fact begin to talk about what happened in the past as a way to move to the future. Not to stick in the past, and let's move ahead in terms of the things that they can support, that will bring people together and bring people to come together. The problem with transitional justice appears to be that if everybody's not on board, it's not going to happen. Look at countries like Myanmar and Sudan who aren't at that point yet, but will. I have very little hope that transitional justice will be of any effect, because already the worst are insulating themselves. It's happening today, this week in Addis, or last week in Addis, partly because there's no moving on. The situation in Myanmar is only going to get a hell of a lot worse before it gets any better. To be able to anticipate things like transitional justice, the political institutions that exist in this country have proven to be vibrant, resilient. Yeah, there's problems. Elections, great elections, business, great business. But those institutions do have the capacity. And I hope that we're able, that those are able to turn on those institutions and get the progress that is so important. It's going to be needed. Any top approach in terms of implementing an agreement, implementing some sort of thing that we call reconciliation, transitional justice, in my view, has to come from the bottom up. It cannot be imposed. We cannot expect the diplomats and the governments to come to this agreement. We talk about it so often. Somebody said to me yesterday, transitional justice doesn't work. We haven't seen it. That's just not a Coast Guard. That's around the world. Transitional justice is that. I mean, I would argue that Northern Ireland is an example of what was some new progress. And it was interesting. 20 years ago, we were bringing some of the women who led the process,
to make sure it works. We're bringing them here to be able to talk to other women and not just women, but others who are very keen to learn about that experience. So there are examples where it has a lot of examples from unfortunately. But as I say, localized efforts are absolutely essential. The involvement of people that traditionally interact have not been involved. Women in this country have done very well on local politics. Women in this country have two presidents. But how many women are involved in the discussions and the debate and the dialogue? How many women have been elected at the municipal level? That's where it happens. I mean, I'm involved in federal politics in Canada. People say, why are you involved in municipal politics? Absolutely not. It's too crazy. It's too weak. And in sort of a sarcastic fashion. But it is. If you're going to get involved in municipal politics in this country or anywhere else, you've got to be prepared to get right down into it with your neighbors, with the people across the street, with the like you to be in and get things done. And that's why municipal elections but the communities, whether they're different districts or actual communities across the country, are where you're going to find reconciliation, where you're going to find truth, where you're going to find support, because there will not be success if these issues, if there is not support, even though we're talking 27 years later. But there are still many things that need to be done. So I do not go any further. I thank you for having me, and I look forward to how this emerges in the coming months and years. Because as said, Kosovo is a critical part of Europe, and has a huge future, and in Europe, and hopefully other institutions as well. But the issues have got to be dealt with in a progressive fashion as opposed to a regressive fashion. And I think then there'll be some real
Thank you so much. Somehow we always come back to what we like most involved, active involvement of women in politics at local level as well. Thank you for your insights. And now we have 14 minutes. I'm going to be strict to give the floor to you to share your thoughts or ask an additional question to our panelists. This is very broad. We have a very broad spectrum of topics, and time has been presented. Urgent telephone call. Please, you all, we have people from Kosovo who are part of our story. More than 40 years of democratic movement. We started with the fall of Berlin Wall. We have diplomats, we have ambassadors, scholars, journalists. Floor is yours. And let's ask the tough questions. Please, Mr. Richard.
Forgive me, it's not a question at all, but Patrick reminded me, I just checked. Well, the British government did pass amnesty laws for the trans-British couples. They were ruled illegal by the European Court of Human Rights. And since then, there have been different variations, and there's endless tension, particularly over crimes committed by British soldiers, death squads, in fact, about whether they should be put on just on trial or not. He's a great expert. It's a paradox. But sometimes we make the best the enemy of the good. So the European Convention of Human Rights just said no, you can't amnesty out. If you put every German who killed somebody in the Second World War on trial, we'd still be having trials of 100-year-old men.
So, Who wants to take us out?
Kush dëshiron të te akullin, të ndër fjallin?
Anna?
Ana?
No.
Jo?
No one?
Askush?
Thank you.
Faleminderit.
Dan Perry.
John Perry.
Thank you.
Where's the beer?
Zëtë më këto është.
Sabotage. Right, the idea that you should forget the past.
Qëllimi është që të harrohet e kaluar. Unë jam një peshë gazetar, dua qartësi.
But Patrick, you were saying essentially that the past is so critical that you're going to count how many Serbs and how many Kosovars. By the way, I wonder if the severity of the punishments should come to that equation, but I imagine that's also aligned with your conclusion, which is that something's wrong. I wanted to ask about the European Union. It seems to me that the European Union can be incredibly useful for post-conflict societies by raising questions that would otherwise involve, for example, be incredibly Victorian-like, should Kosovo unite, for example? It becomes a moot point if everyone's in the EU. But you said Kosovo will never be in the EU. I wonder why, and I wonder if the panelists agree that the EU can be a mechanism for papering over the post-conflict injustices.
When I say never, I should say in a foreseeable future. Because I do think that the context where we are right now, as Dennis has mentioned something about far right and the rise of far right in the European landscape, but Montenegro and Albania probably will be members in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I don't think maybe 2, maybe 5. But I don't see anybody else joining again in a foreseeable future for different reasons. I don't think the Baltics will allow for Serbia to join without completely cutting all the ties to Moscow, which I don't see happening anytime soon. And I don't think Kosovo, Bosnia will be able to join for their own different reasons. But I think it's not even important. I do think, as I said, Germany is more important. Kosovo politicians, myself included in the past, we forget, and I had a good lunch with the German ambassador 2 days ago. If you go to Thessaloniki now, you have to get fingerprints. You have to get a photo. You're going to have to wait 10-15 minutes for each car to enter Greece. In August, it's going to take 4 or 5 hours for you to go to Greece in a relatively short queue of a few hundred cars. Kosovo forgets that Albania and Montenegro, once they join EU, they're going to be EU-Kosovo border. And our free movement to our cousins, our families, our property, our holiday destinations, a few hours away to Pristina, that's going to be an EU border. You're going to have to get fingers, face. It's going to take hours to enter Albania and Montenegro. We don't think that right now, in our crisis of partisanship, in our inability to connect the dots of dialogue with Serbia, EU integration, internal consensus of national importance, we forget that if Kosovo will not join EU for a single future, others are joining EU for a single future. And from the local businessman who sells tomatoes and will not be able to pass the phytosanitary inspections of EU standards when going to 1 hour away from prison, to furniture producers who sell in Vucin and Montenegro who will not be able to pass EU standards. None of that is coming to the radar screen of our current political landscape. The conference is in a different context and a different topic, but I do think that what EU has pushed Kosovo on and Kosovo has delivered has not been recognized sufficiently. And then we deviated from the road due to that lack of recognition. Partially also. Not only. Thank you.
If nobody else,
Nëse askush tjetër dëshiron të thotë diçka, do ta
Thank you very much.
faleminderit shumë të
We have
gjithëve.
5 minutes
Kemi
until
5 minuta
the second panel comes here.
ndryrimin e
So,
paneleve.
thank you again. Pleasure to be with you today.
Kënaqësi që
Jo, pushim 5 minuta. Po. Qita të gjonë. Qita të pas pak. E qitot. Qita për. Qita pas pak.
Shkum të atë, ideale? Ha?
Atë mikrofonat.
Shumë?